Welcome to our second hour of Connect the World. I'm Linda Kincaid, live at the CNN Centre. We will be addressing the continued turmoil surrounding Novak Djokovic's attempt to defend his title at the Australian Open in just a few minutes. But first, we start in Germany. A long-awaited measure of justice and accountability today for victims of Syria's devastating civil war and the Assad regime. In a landmark ruling, a German court has convicted and sentenced a former Syrian army colonel to life in prison for crimes against humanity. ANWAR RASLAN headed a feared investigation unit at a notorious Damascus detention center before he fled the country a decade ago. Prosecutors say thousands of people were tortured there, dozens died. In court, survivors faced the former army colonel and described what they endured. Well, CNN's JOMANA KARADSHEH is in KOBLENZ, Germany, where the former Syrian colonel was convicted and sentenced. Good to have you with us, JOMANA. And RASLAN, of course, is the most senior ex-Syrian official to face accountability in court.
You know, Linda, we can't overstate the significance of this moment being described as a historic moment. Yes, Colonel ANWAR RASLAN was one man here on trial. He was convicted of crimes against humanity for overseeing those tortures and murders that you mentioned in Al-Khatib prison in Damascus. Those crimes took place over the span of a few months, Linda, and this is why people here would tell you, the lawyers, the victims, survivors would tell you that yes, this one man may have been here on trial. He may be the one who is going to serve this life in prison sentence. But to them, this is a significant moment because this is an entire regime, they feel, that has been convicted of crimes against humanity. One man alone cannot commit these crimes. They say he represents an entire system and a regime. A very significant moment. A few hours we were out here with Anwar al-Bunni, a prominent defender of human rights in Syria, a human rights lawyer who himself was a political prisoner for a few years. And he was very emotional, describing this day, this moment, as something that he has fought for a very long time, saying this is a victory for justice, a victory for the victims of the regime, the victims of this man, Colonel Anwar RASLAN, and also a victory for those who did not live to see this day. Linda, we have to warn our viewers, they are about to see our report that contains some disturbing and graphic images of torture.
It is in this small, idyllic German city where Syria's long road to justice begins, with an end to a decade of impunity for some of the worst atrocities of our time. This court in Koblenz is the first in the world to convict a former senior member of the Assad regime of crimes against humanity. A year ago, it sentenced a junior co-defendant to 4.5 years in prison for his role in the case. For nearly 2 years, the court heard of horrors that unfolded thousands of miles away at a Damascus detention facility, where former Colonel ANWAR RASLAN allegedly oversaw the torture of as many as 4,000 detainees, sexual assaults, and the death of dozens during the early days of the uprising. RASLAN defected in 2012 and later fled to Germany, where his past caught up with him. Some of his victims were among the hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees who also made it to Germany.
He ordered directly to a man next to me, make him lay on his belly and raise his feet in the air, like a stress situation. And once the answers didn't suit him, the other man on command starts to hit until he says stop. It's like hell.
Musician Wasim Muqdad was tortured 10 years ago. He says he's been tormented by the trauma ever since. Reliving that trauma and confronting his jailer, he says, was a duty to those who never made it out to tell their own stories.
I gave my testimony on the 19th of August 2020. I felt relief, a huge burden from my shoulders. This memory that I kept willingly, because I didn't want it to be just lost, and those suffering will be in vain.
Activists have been collecting evidence of the regime's rampant and systematic torture long before this trial. In 2014, some of the most damning visual evidence of state-sponsored torture emerged after horrific photographs of thousands of detainees tortured to death in Assad's jails were smuggled out of Syria by a military defector codenamed Caesar. But up until this trial, no one had ever been held accountable. The path to international accountability has been blocked by regime allies Russia and China.
But that is starting to change now. Here in Germany and in other European countries, victims have found a new path to justice under universal jurisdiction, a legal principle that allows national courts like this one to prosecute grave crimes against international law, no matter where in the world they were committed.
It is the breakthrough Anwar al-Bunni has dedicated his life to. The human rights lawyer was a driving force behind this trial and other cases in Europe.
Crimes against humanity, it's not crimes who committed by one person. It's committed by regime, by state. When the charge will be crimes against humanity, that means holds the system, holds the regime in all the person charged now.
Bunni believes this trial sends a message of hope at a time when Assad appears to have won the war, and many in the international community seem keen to turn the page.
We want to send message to the criminals who still in Syria, or they escape to here and think they are safe now and okay, there is no safe place can hide you. No safe place to you in whole the world.
Victims say their battle for justice is only just beginning.
And you know, Linda, it has been such an incredibly emotional day for so many here. Just a short time ago, we were speaking to Wasim Maqdad, who you saw there in our piece, and Wasim was saying that after the verdict today, he feels that he can now begin his journey towards healing. After living for 10 years with this trauma of torture that he went through. But for so many others, this is a day of mixed feelings. You know, at the end of our piece there, you saw these women who were standing outside the courthouse. Some of them were carrying the photographs of their loved ones, fathers, brothers, sons who have disappeared. They are amongst the forcibly disappeared in Syria, an estimated 120,000 people who have vanished without a trace after being detained by the regime's forces. And these women were out here today happy to see a verdict, seeing someone being held accountable. At the same time, they want to remind the world that when we talk about the crimes of the Assad regime, they say to them, this is not something of the past. They are still living these crimes and the impact it is having on them and their lives.
That regime, of course, is still in power. JOMANA Karachi, good to have you with us. Thanks so much. Well, my next guest is Stephen Rapp, who joins me from Washington. Now, he served as the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice from 2009 to 2015, where he coordinated U.S. government support for international criminal tribunals. He also helped the United Nations gain access to tens of thousands of photos detailing the torture by Syria's Assad regime. Good to have you with us.
Good to be with you on this great day.
Yeah, tell us about your reaction to this case, this sentencing.
Well, I'm extremely excited and gratified, but particularly in thinking of the victims who've hoped for justice for so long, who feel that the world has turned the back on their suffering and have finally achieved it in this case. And I would note that this is the first of many, but it's a reflection of the survivors and the evidence that they brought out of Syria. Caesar and his 50,000 photographs, which have been found rock solid evidence by these judges of all of these tens of thousands of people tortured to death in the government facilities, like the one where RASLAN headed general intelligence. And then groups like CIJA, Commission for International Justice and Accountability, a non-governmental organization that I chair, that with the Syrian partners has brought out 1 million pages of documents, regime documents, that show the orders by which this machinery of murder was set and kept in motion.
Yeah, I mean, your organization helped, as you say, deliver some of the evidence in this case, evidence that has been collected over nearly a decade. But in terms of the significance of the case, it can't be overstated, can it, that this is the first conviction in history for murder and torture under a regime that's still in power.
That's remarkable. I mean, I prosecuted at the Rwanda Tribunal and was chief prosecutor at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. But we were dealing with crimes that had already been committed where we had the cooperation of governments in helping us locate the evidence. So this case had to be built from the bottom up, but it's a real credit to the German authorities because they take more seriously, I think, than any country in the world the words "never again," and by their investigation, by their close working with the victims, with the survivors, with the NGO investigators, and now also with those at the UN, at the new international mechanism in Geneva and elsewhere. They're able to build these cases, and I think we can see this happening elsewhere, no matter what Russia and China are able to block in the Security Council of the UN.
And as you said, this could be the first of many similar cases. In this case, the colonel was found guilty of more than 4,000 counts of torture, dozens of counts of murder, and a few cases of sexual assault. How much did this case rely on the testimony of survivors, some of which we just heard JOMANA speaking to? And do we know about what sort of help they're getting now?
Well, it relied on those survivors. And keep in mind that one of the reasons that Germany had this case is it has 800,000 survivors of the horrors of Syria. And when we talk about the refugee crisis, and we recognize Germany for taking in 800,000 refugees, it was because of these crimes that people were driven to leave hearth and home and brave, dangerous seas and hostile borders to come to Europe and elsewhere. And thus, it's entirely appropriate that Germany investigate, give justice to the people that they've admitted, send a message to those back in Syria that if you commit these crimes, there are going to be consequences. And I think really establish a rule that may prevent such crimes in the future. So I think it's a powerful message. I think one of the most important ones is that even while some talk about normalization, because UAE and Bahrain, for instance, have established diplomatic relations and exchanged ambassadors with Damascus. There really can be no normalization with this regime because this sends the message, no matter what. If you try to step outside the country that you've devastated, you can face justice just like RASLAN did. And
yeah,
we're
I want
to
ask you about that because we did hear from one of the survivors in JOMANA's piece talking about these crimes were committed by the entire regime. What does this mean for the Assad regime?
Well, keep in mind that the judges, of course, convicted RASLAN today, but it was of crimes against humanity. And as my friend Anwar al-Buni said, one person doesn't commit a crime against humanity. It has to be part of a systematic or widespread attack. And so the judges found in this case, as they did in the case of the co-defendant, that this government was indeed engaging in a machinery of torture and murder. And we have obviously the specific deaths here, the 60 people while RASLAN was in charge of interrogation, the 4,000 people that he tortured or was responsible for. But the Caesar photos show 7,000 individual victims tortured in this facility and others just through August of 2013. And we had a gravedigger who testified in the trial in September of 2020, who continued to dig mass graves on the orders of the regime until he was able to get out of Syria at the end of 2017. So tens of thousands of others have ended up in the same fate. One group, Syrian group, we have 123,000 missing. Sadly, many of those people are in those mass graves, and the Syrian regime refuses to tell us anything about it. So there can't be normalization.
Stephen Rapp, a really good conversation. We'll have to leave it there for now, but well done to you and your organization for documenting these war crimes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.